In the previous session, we talked about a district weight, the cost of education index. And in this session, we're going to talk about the second district weight, the thing that's unique to a district, not necessarily to student needs within that district. And this is called Diseconomy of Scale, and it applies to small and mid-sized school districts, an adjustment for them. And we start with the adjusted basic allotment. You recall we had the basic allotment, we applied the cost of education index and got the adjusted basic allotment. Now we're going the next step, and the result of this will be called the adjusted allotment. So let's get started. This is what the last slide I showed you in the previous session. Basic allotment, apply the CEI, then go to the adjusted basic allotment. We're going to begin with that adjusted basic allotment. Now, smaller schools have a higher cost because of the limited number of students they have, and it's not quite as cost efficient as a larger school. When I was Superintendent Kaufman, I had 10 sections of first grade. So if I got extra kids come in and had to add a section, that was a 10% increase. If you only have one section and you go over the maximum number you can have in that first grade class, then you're going 100% more because you're having to add a whole nother unit. One extra classroom in both cases, but a lot different impact. And so that's the whole justification for having a diseconomy of scale adjustment. And Texas is blessed by having rural schools that add to the flavor and the culture of our state. And it's not really very costly to do this because there are so few children that are in rural Texas. So we're going to define a couple of terms first. Average daily attendance, and it's ADA. And I will probably never say average daily attendance again, although I'll try to. So when I say ADA, average daily attendance, and just simply put, it's just the average number of students that show up every day to class. So you might have an enrollment of a certain amount, but they don't all come every day. So it's the average of those that actually show up, and that's average daily attendance. Now another term is full-time equivalent, and basically what that amounts to is 30 hours over the course of a 5-day week. You can look at it as one day being 6 hours, 6 classes. So just to give you an example here, if you'll look at the slide, let's say that this first student has 1 hour a day that the student is in a career and technology eligible course. Using that as an example, and we'll get into more detail about the career and technology funding and how that all works in a little bit. So you take that one and you multiply it by 5 days that in that week, and you get a total of a total of 5. All right, student B now takes a 2-hour course, and over the course of 5 days, that's 10 hours. So you have a total number of hours, contact hours of 15 just in those 2 students. So you take the 30 and divide by that. 15 divided by 30 is 1/2, 0.5. So those 15 contact hours means that you have a half FTE. If you had other students, whenever you get to a total of 6 hours a day times 5 is 30, that's 1 FTE. Now, when you're doing the small schools and the mid-sized schools adjustment, you don't use ADA, not your full ADA. You use the regular program ADA. And all that is, you take your total refined ADA, and just nearly always that's just an average of the kids that show up every day. And you subtract out the FTEs from 2 programs, special education and career and technology. And what you have left over is your regular program ADA. And we won't belabor that. It's a simple point. Don't make it harder than it is. You take your total ADA, you subtract your special ed FTEs, subtract your career and technology program FTEs, and what's left is the regular program ADA. Now, two different funding formulas. The small district adjustment, and to be eligible for that, you must have fewer than 1,600 regular ADA, regular program ADA. Midsize is for slightly larger districts, and that starts at 5,000 regular program ADA and goes below. Now, looking at just the small schools adjustment, small district adjustment, there are two of those. One of them is when you have 300 square miles or more geographically, and the other is when you have less than 300 square miles. Back in the early 80s, there was a movement to try to encourage, for lack of a better word, consolidation of school districts. So they said if you have fewer than 300 square miles, you're close enough, you can consolidate with a neighbor, and you would have more kids, and therefore you wouldn't have as great of a diseconomy of scale. So there was a penalty that was put in place. And for the regular formula, the one the state recognizes as the cost for a small schools program, this is the multiplier. And they said, we're going to encourage consolidation, so instead of that, we're going to have a multiplier of 0.003 and give you less money, less than what we say it actually costs. It was kind of to starve these districts out. And because of a political disagreement, some powers that be decided that they would further punish this representative by having another penalty, and so they dropped the 0.003 to 0.0025. So they went from 40 to 30, and then from 30 to 25. And so this, which includes 5 points that were just to get back at somebody for not doing what they had promised to do, that's been penalized in districts all across the state, children in districts all across the state that happen to be in districts less than 300 square miles. And we're talking about over 450 of them across the state. And that's been since the early 80s. So you're talking about over 30 years that this has been going on. And they talk about small by choice districts. Well, communities are not small by choice. They just are small by happenstance due to a number of factors. And they choose to have a local school. Now, at the time, there was a movement to try to stop that. And small communities would hold on to their school because generally when you lose your school, you lose your community. And it's very important to that community. They take a lot of pride in their school, and small schools do a good job of educating children, just like other schools do. So in today's world, though, something that's very much in favor legislatively have been the charter schools, and those are small by design. So if you're wanting to create small schools that are within existing school districts, surely there's no need to further punish communities for having a small school that may be larger than some of the charter schools that are being created. So first of all, that's the difference. Let's go forward. So first thing in small schools, and this is regardless of whether it's less than 300 square miles or 300 square miles or more, you start with that 1,600 cutoff and you subtract your ADA. The smaller you are, then the larger your answer will be, and it'll take into consideration that you have a greater diseconomy of scale. So in this illustration, we're going to assume that this district has 1,000 ADA, and just for the record, we'll need that in a little bit. The adjusted basic allotment is, after you did the CEI, is 5,200. So you take 1,600 and you subtract 1,000, you get 600. That's the number you use in the next step. There it is right there. And you multiply it by the weight. Now in this case, you have the district that's less than 300 square miles, so their weight is 0.00025. You multiply the 600 number by that weight, and that's the operational weight for this small district, 0.15. Of course, when you multiply by weight, you have to add a 1 back in front of it. Otherwise, you just reduce things. Instead of the 1 keeps it the same, the 0.15 adds to it. So you take this multiplier, 1.15, and you multiply it by 5,200, and that gives you the adjusted allotment. Go from adjusted basic allotment to adjusted basic allotment. So that would be the number that this small district with 1,000 children and a $5,200 adjusted basic allotment would use going forward in the funding formulas. Now, let's take a district that's 300 square miles or more. So that first one applied, say, to a district, just picking a large geographic square mile district of, say, 299 square miles. That's what they would get. Now, let's say you took a neighboring district that had just one more square mile. They had 300. By the way, that 300 is not based in research or anything. It's just an arbitrarily chosen number. Yeah, there's no rhyme or reason for it being 300 square miles. I don't know if there's a funding issue back in the early 80s or not. But you go through the same process. The only difference is instead of multiplying by that 0.00025, you multiply by 0.00304, a bigger number. And it would take that off. You can see that you instead of 0.15, you have 0.24. That's a bigger number. That's better. You add your 1 back in, and you have 1.24, whereas before we had 1.15. When we take the 1.24 and multiply it by the adjusted basic allotment, which is a larger funding level, just because the district had more square miles, not because it had greater cost. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, it's because they have more transportation costs. There's a formula for that. That's not the reason why it was done. It had nothing to do with people with 300 square miles having more transportation costs than somebody at 299, even though you would assume the more square miles, the more miles of transportation, but that's not so. And if you wanted to make an adjustment in funding based upon the cost of transportation, you shouldn't do it by square miles in a district. You should do it by the number of miles that are being traveled. So it'd be a bad way of doing it, even if there was any truth to it. Now let's do a mid-sized district adjustment. And it's the exact same process. Here, of course, with the regular program ADA for a mid-sized district would be larger, and so you'd have 3,000 in our illustration, but we're going to keep the same adjusted basic allotment of 5,200. Here, instead of subtracting from 1,600, you subtract from 5,000, which is what's in the mid-sized district adjustment formula. So you take your regular program ADA, subtract it, and you have 2,000. That's the number you use going forward here. Now you'll notice it's kind of a line of sight thing, but it's equivalent to the less than 300 square mile number. That was done because of that reason, just to relate it to something. It's 0.00040, 25. So when you multiply your 2,000 by that multiplier, you get 0.05. Add your 1 back. This right here is your weight for this particular mid-sized district. If it had fewer children, that weight would be a little higher. If it had more children, that weight would be a little lower. And since there's less diseconomy of scale in a mid-sized district than there is in a small district, it's appropriate that that multiplier would be smaller. So you multiply that multiplier by the adjusted basic allotment, and this is the adjusted allotment for this particular mid-sized district. If you wanted to graph the three formulas, the small district less than 300 square miles, the small district 300 or more square miles, and the mid-sized district adjustment, this is what it would look like. And the green here, of course, is the midsize. It starts over here at 5,000. The two small districts start at 1,600. Now, the way this works is you get the larger of whichever of these calculations apply, because, as you can see, the midsize district adjustment does not stop at 1,600. And it's good that it doesn't. Otherwise, you would have a drop-off in districts that were larger would still get less money because the small schools district is just starting off. So as you got, let's say you were actually losing regular program ADA and you're going down here, but you're greater than 300 square miles. When you got to that point, then you'd switch over and you'd be on the small schools formula. If you're less than 300 square miles and you were losing regular program ADA, when you got here, you would switch over and go up there. This distance in here is the difference in what the state provides just because of the penalty formula, which is not justified in any sense. So, to wrap it up, start with your basic allotment. You do the cost of education index, which applies to the cost of doing business in different geographic areas through no fault of the district. And then that gives you your adjusted basic allotment, ABA. If you're less than 5,000 regular program ADA, then you apply the small and mid-size formulas. And then you would go to the adjusted allotment. And of course, if you were bigger than 5,000 regular program ADAs, there's no point in going through the diseconomy of scale formulas, and you would just jump from adjusted basic allotment, and whatever you had here as your ABA would also be your adjusted allotment, or AA. And that concludes the session.